Lads, lasses and the rest of the masses, welcome to another tier list video. The last time I did one of these was back in the summer before the season started, and you guys overwhelmingly voted for an updated tier list. I've got every player that has represented the first team at some point this season, and we're going to rank them into these 6 boxes. I just want to preface a few things. Firstly, I'm recording this after the Leicester game, so well in advance of when this video will be released. I'm going to say some things that may not be accurate by that time, so just keep that in mind. Secondly, know that these are just my personal opinions. We may not agree on everything, and that's fine. If you do think differently, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. So, without further ado, let's start with the first player, and these are in a random order. I'm not really sure why they appeared in this order, but the first player on the list is Cesare Casadei. Now, I'm going to be putting Cesare Casadei into the promote section. I know technically he's already been promoted, but the amount of minutes that he's getting doesn't really warrant me saying that he's a bench player. I think that he should be promoted into the first team more regularly and get more game time, which is why I'll be putting him here. Obviously, midfield is a very problem area for us at the moment. We only have like 2 fit midfielders that will ever play, and that being Enzo and Caicedo. So yeah, I think Cesare is one of those players that can definitely get some minutes for the first team, and I think he should be promoted next season. Let's talk about the next player, which is going to be Trevor Chalobah. Now, this pains me to say because I do think he's good enough for the bench, and I mentioned this in my last video, and I will be like cutting back to my last video so to kind of compare of what I said then and what I said now. But one of the things I do remember me saying about Chalobah is that I think that he's a very versatile player that can get on the bench, and because he can play many different positions, I think he's got value to stay here. Unfortunately, I don't think that that's going to happen. I think that he will be moved on this season, and I'm going to be putting him in sell. And mainly just because he is one of those profitable homegrown players, and obviously the board wants to get rid of some of those to balance the books. So I do think he's going to be sold. Admittedly, I do think that he is a very replaceable player in a way, especially with some of the centre-backs that we have coming through the academy. Obviously, centre-back is not particularly the problem area for us. We have a lot of other issues in different areas which I think are more important, so I don't think we're going to spend too much money on a new centre-back, and if we do, it's probably going to be someone that's for the future. As of me recording this, there are reports that we may be in for Murillo from Nottingham Forest, I believe. So that could be an option that we go for. Don't know how expensive he would be, but there we go. The next player, this one's going to be fun. The next player is Ian Martson. Now, this really annoys me because I have to go with what I think is going to happen, and I think he's going to be sold. And it bugs me to no end because I think that he is good enough. He is good enough of a player to be here. He genuinely is, and he could play here, but I don't think that he will. I think that, again, he's another one of those players that's an academy product that can get us a profit, and obviously Dortmund, he's been flying for Dortmund. I just don't think that the ownership will see the value in him as a player rather than him as an asset, and especially if Pochettino is here next season, which I'm still not sure he will be, but if he is here next season, then I don't think Maatsen has a place in this team because he obviously doesn't rate him very highly, hence why he was sent out on loan and never given any game time. So yeah, I think he'll be sold, unfortunately. Next one is David Washington. I'm going to put David Washington into the loan category here because I think that he's good enough now as a player to kind of get some first team experience at a bigger club and not just be wasting his development down in our youth team. I think that he could definitely play as a backup to one of our strikers, but considering we may be bringing in a more established star, I think Jackson will probably end up being the kind of rotational striker in that regard, and I don't think that he will get a look in. And as a third choice striker, you rarely do get minutes, and it would be harsh for him to just sit on the bench and not really develop when he's so young. And obviously we know he's got the talent because he's been firing for the under 21s. So yeah, I think that he could definitely go out on a loan and get some experience somewhere else. Maybe a high championship side or maybe a low prem side would be good for him. Next one, we've got Eddie Beach. I'm going to put him in youth or reserves. Again, but he's one of those players where he's like the 4th choice goalkeeper, and I just don't think he's ever going to actually play for the side, which is unfortunate, but that's the way things go. Next up is Enzo Fernandez, and this is the first one that's obviously going to go into the first 11. What I will be doing for this, because I don't think I stuck to this truly in the last one, I will be actually making this first 11 column genuinely the 11 players that I think should start next season, and then the bench will be genuinely the players that I think should be on the bench. So yeah, Enzo Fernandez is obviously the first player on here. It's pretty obvious in it. He's obviously one of our best players. He's always going to hold down that midfield role. Not only is he in a very expensive investment, and that's probably why he's going to stay in the first team, but he's just one of our best players on his day. And obviously, though he's been a little bit worse this season than he was last season because of certain tactical changes and certain roles that he's had to play that he may not be familiar with, but in some regards he's improved, in some regards he's regressed. But obviously he's going to stay in the first 11. I think that's one of the most obvious ones. Our first controversial one's going to come up now, because I've just seen Raheem Sterling. As I've said, I'm recording this basically directly after the Leicester game, where he put in an absolute horrific performance. I'm going to be putting him in sell, quite obviously. The thing is, I don't want you to kind of misconstrue that this is a reactionary thing, and that I'm doing this just because he had that bad performance. I've had this opinion for the longest time, and I think maybe even in my updated tier list, the last one I did, I'm pretty sure I put him as a first 11 because I knew that he would be playing. And that was my prediction for the season. I knew that he would be playing. It wasn't my personal opinion that I wanted. I didn't want him to play. And I've had this opinion from Sterling for a while now that I just don't want him at the club. His form is getting worse and worse. He's putting in weaker and weaker performances. He's very inconsistent. His experience is not worth anything because he obviously doesn't show it. And obviously he is the highest paid player at the club and it's costing the club funds. I think that he's probably going to move to either the Saudi League or probably the MLS, one of those like lower quality leagues that's got a lot of money. I think that that's where he'll go to, but just I don't think that he's the type of player that we need in our club anymore, and he's blocking the progression of our other wingers that could otherwise be playing. Next up is Kepa Arrizabalaga. Now, I think this is pretty obvious as well. He's going to be also going into the sell category. Kepa's one of those ones where it's like he's out on loan, but he's only out on loan because we don't want him in the team and we couldn't find anyone to buy him. Whereas now, with that whole year behind us, I think that we will find some suitors for him. Obviously, he's lost his place at Real to their second choice goalkeeper. So I don't think he's going to be getting us a very large profit, but I think he will be one that is looked to be sold on this season, or in this window coming up rather. Obviously, with us having Sanchez and Petrovic, I just don't think he's ever going to get into the team, especially Petrovic, who basically has every single quality that Kepa has. So yeah, I think he'll be moved on this season, not really much of a debate about that. The next player is going to be Noni Madueke, and I'm going to be putting him on the bench. Not because I don't think he's good enough for the first 11, but his spot is taken. And we'll get onto that at some point later on in this video, but I think he has got quality. I think he's a very good player. We just saw, obviously, from the Leicester game, can come up with absolute magic, and he is very good on the ball, can score goals, can provide. And I think he has a lot more to give to this Chelsea team, and I feel that he's unjustly been thrust to the bench and not really played because of certain players that are on the books, like I said, with Sterling. I think mainly if Sterling wasn't here this season, I think Madueke would be starting every game. But because of certain things that I expect to happen, and certain players that are playing in certain positions, obviously his main position is right wing, and we have other players that can play in that position better than he can, so I think that he would be a good option on the bench for the foreseeable future. Next one is Bettinelli. I'm going to put him as the reserve goalkeeper. There's not much I need to say about that really. He is just our third choice. I doubt that he actually gets sold. Next up is Armando Broja, who's out on loan at the moment, and I don't think there's much reason to give him another loan. I think he's another one that could be sold. We've done a lot of selling in recent times, obviously a lot of buying too. I think that selling is still going to continue because we do have a lot of players out on loan, Broja being one of them. I think we've got like the 4 million or something for him already, for him not playing. And yeah, I think he'll be sold to probably a team like Southampton or someone like that, like a lower championship side or a newly promoted side to the Premier League. I don't think he'll go to anything other than that really, but yeah, we'll have to sell him. Speaking of strikers, next player up is Nicholas Jackson, and I think it's pretty obvious that he'll be in the first 11. Do I think he'll start every game? No, especially next season if we bring in a new striker. I think he will probably be dropped to the bench, either that or he plays from the left wing. But I think that he has too much value to give, as our starting striker at the moment, and he's just getting better every single game, especially as we saw just now in the Leicester game. He was very, very good for that game, not only winning us the free kick that got the player sent off, but also providing the assist for Marc Cucurella, and genuinely just being a nuisance all game. And that's what he does. That's one of the things he's really good at, is just being a nuisance. And I'm glad that he's made the faith that I put into him not wasted in a way. At the start of this season, before the season even started really, I was backing him to do well before we even signed him, and he's gone on and proven me right, and I will forever be grateful whenever he does well, because I think he's a really, not only a good player, but a really good person to have in the dressing room. And yeah, let's hope that he stays in the first 11 for next season. Next up is Dujan Whisper-Richards. Now, this is a really weird one, because I think that he's one of those players that could benefit from going on loan, but I don't think that that's going to happen to him. I think that he's actually going to stay with our youth team and develop a little bit more. He has only just recently started playing a few games, and obviously he is so young. I think that giving him that chance to kind of develop in those circumstances will be good for him. Obviously, I think that thrusting him into a loan immediately and maybe moving his environment from what he's used to will not be as beneficial to him at such a young age, so I think he can stay in the youth team, the under-18s and the under-21s, and yeah, play for those guys, get some experience, and then if his performances increase and he gets really, really good, then maybe he can go out on loan next year, or even be promoted to the first team. Next is Gaga Slonina. Now, this one's really upsetting to me because I think that Gaga is genuinely good enough to play for us. I genuinely think he's good enough to be a bench player. I don't think that that's going to happen. Admittedly, I think he is going to be one of these players that's kind of stuck in loan limbo or just gets sold. But you know what? I think with Sanchez being a bit of a liability, as I said, this is just my personal opinion, I would promote him. If we need a third choice keeper, I think that Slonina could be that third choice, and if he wants to be the second choice after Petrovic, he can definitely be that too. I would feel aggrieved if we let go of another really, really promising goalkeeper, because the same thing happened with Marcin Bulka, and now he is absolutely flying. I would not want that to happen to Slonina, and obviously with his connections to the MLS, him and Petrovic would probably make good teammates, so that would probably be beneficial to them. Next up on the list is actually Sanchez, so I'm going to put him on the bench. I think he is genuinely a player that could be sold, but because we have bought him so recently, I don't think that will happen. I think that the owners will try and get some value out of their investment, and Sanchez is good enough to be a bench goalkeeper, really. The thing with keepers, I think bench players for keepers is a lot different to bench players for other positions, because you don't really ever need to bench or like rotate your first choice goalkeeper, and to be honest, the fact that we did rotate our first choice goalkeeper out for the Leicester game that just happened, I think was a bit of a silly decision, and we were a bit worse off because of it. So as long as he can just warm the bench and occasionally come in if Petrovic has like an injury or something, he can definitely do that. I don't think that he's poor enough for that it will affect our form too much, so he could definitely play as a bench player. But either way, this I genuinely, I said Slonina could genuinely be this bench player if the ownership and the manager wanted to put enough faith into him, but I just don't think that's going to happen. Next up is Benoit Badiashile. Now, I think that Benoit had some big attributes about him, but I'm going to be putting him on the bench. I think that he's got a lot of value as a centre-back. I think that he's not in the greatest form in the grand scheme of things, and obviously with the injuries he's been getting, I don't think that's been helping things. But as specifically that left-sided centre-back, as I'm going to be putting, as I said, an entire 11 in here, there's obviously a very clear candidate for the left-sided centre-back spot that I think will play instead of him, and so he's going to have to hold the bench. Next up is Moises Caicedo, and obviously Moises Caicedo goes straight into the first 11. We'll actually start organising these in kind of like back to front. Caicedo obviously starts for us every single game, and he has been one of our best players this season. He's been very underrated, as I've mentioned in the past. I don't think a lot of people kind of look to him as one of those players that's been one of our most important players because of the rise of certain people like Palmer, like Gusto, like Jackson. I think that he's gone really under the radar this season. I think he has been very, very good for us. Again, I mention this all the time, but his price tag really puts like a damper on him because people think that he's not living up to that price tag. But he can't control the price tag, so that's a silly argument to make in my opinion. I think he's been very, very good, and I don't think that his place in the first team is going to be under question at any time soon. The only issue that we have with the midfield, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, is because we don't really know how Poch wants to set up his midfield with Lavia, and if Lavia comes back, what that does to the team. Because we don't know if he wants to play a 3 with all 3 of those players, including Caicedo, Enzo, and Lavia, or if he wants to be more attacking with someone like Carney Chukwuemeka, or what have you. We don't really know. The next player is going to be Lucas Bergstrom, and again, he's going to be one of these players that just stays on the reserves. We have so many goalkeepers that one of them can probably go... You know what? Bergstrom could probably go out on loan, actually. I think he's a player that could benefit from going on loan rather than rotting away in the youth team. But again, he's just one of those players I just don't think is going to ever get game time for us, and he's just one of those players that will, like, he's one of those players of the revolving door of Chelsea that will come in and then come out, and that's kind of how that works. He doesn't ever really get into the team for us. Let's move on to the next player, which is going to be Carney Chukwuemeka. Now, this is really, really difficult. This is so difficult because I genuinely do believe in my heart of hearts he is good enough to play for the first 11. Obviously, the goal he just scored in the cup game, really, really good, and he showed that composure in the very limited time that he's had in the first team. He's shown that he can be a very good player. I'm going to be putting him on the bench just because I don't think that he would start over other players if they were fit. So this is the issue that I'm having to deal with in this tier list, is that I'm basing this on whether, if all of the players are fit and able to play, what I think the first 11 would be. Obviously, in this position, in the position that Carney Chukwuemeka does take up, I think that Nkunku would take that spot instead. I think that he's better in those things, even though he hasn't actually really shown it. Obviously, his really big injuries have been kind of hampering him. But if they were both at full fitness, I think that Nkunku would start over Chukwuemeka, and he would be the rotational centre attacking mid, as it were, even though he kind of plays off the left, but I digress. Next player is Mykhailo Mudryk. Oh, this is really difficult. This one's really difficult because I personally do believe that he deserves a spot in the first 11. I think that he's good enough to play in the first 11. I think him having the faith put into him to play from the start and be that left-sided winger, or that 10 in a way, because he sometimes plays that role too. I think having that faith in him to do that would make him a very, very good player, but we haven't really been shown that by Poch this season. He's been very sporadic in the minutes that he's been giving to Mudryk, and with Sterling obviously leaving in this hypothetical scenario, I think that he would immediately be fast-tracked into that spot. Obviously, there's been links to other players, other wingers, like Nico Williams, for example, but I don't think that would be a smart idea if we're trying to save money and trying to gain funds by selling players. I think that just promoting Mudryk into that left winger spot would suffice, and I think that he would benefit largely from playing in the starting 11 regularly. So I'll put him there. Actually, I need to put him here because he's behind Jackson. Next player is Georgi Petrovic, and obviously he's going to be in the first 11. He's 100% going to be our starting goalkeeper next season. I have no doubts about that. He does obviously need to improve in certain areas. Obviously his distribution isn't the greatest, but there is a clear discrepancy between when he plays and when Sanchez plays, in my opinion. And we saw that in the Leicester game just now, that composure that our defenders usually have just completely goes out the window when Sanchez is the goalkeeper rather than Petrovic. I think Petrovic's presence, his ability to claim high balls safely, and his smart passing, even though his distribution as a whole, his long distribution isn't very good, his short passing is very measured and very confident, and that confidence kind of moves to the other players in front of him and makes everyone kind of take that pressure off and not have that kind of indecisiveness in the back at certain times. Whereas I feel like when Sanchez plays, the defenders are a bit panicky, and obviously we get mistakes like the one that happened with DSRC in this game. Those types of things arise. I think Petrovic is good enough to start for us for many years, and he's only going to get better at such a young age, so there we go. I think he's going to start for us this season. He probably starts for us next season. And the thing which is good is that the goalkeeping market is not very good at the moment. There aren't very many targets that we can kind of go for if we were to try and sign a more experienced player in that position. So I think just having faith in Petrovic to take us forward would be the better option. Okay, next up is Cole Palmer, and this is pretty obvious. Cole Palmer starts for us every single day of the week. And he is the reason why I've put Madueke on the bench, because I think Palmer's future is at right wing for us, and it is really upsetting because a lot of the players that we have on our books are right-sided wingers. that I think that we could use, but obviously I think Palmer's just blocking them all. And yes, there's the argument that he could play in the central role, but I don't think he works as good there. I think the strength that Palmer has is when he comes in from the wide areas to become central rather than staying central as a whole. I think that we've seen that this season, that when he does play in the central role, that he doesn't really impact the game as much as he does when he's out on the wing. And those interchanges that he makes with Malo Gusto on the right-hand side, those two have formed a very good partnership. I think that his partnership with Jackson as well, when Jackson moves over to that channel, I think is very, very good. So yeah, next season I will be very surprised if Palmer is not our starting right winger, and he's obviously going to be our player of the season this year, let's be real. He's just been phenomenal for us, and I think moving forward that he will be in the first 11. Next up is Ben Chilwell. Now, man, again, this is just personal opinions. This one hurts me because I like the guy. I think he needs to be sold. Obviously, left back is a problem area for us, and I think we will be bringing in a new left back in this window that's coming up, and in that regard, I think that we kind of need to find the gusto of left backs. If we're to get rid of one of our left backs in that regard when we are bringing in someone new, I think Chilwell is the most expendable of the two out of him and Cucurella. I think Cuckoo still has a lot to offer, and obviously we saw in the FA Cup game he does have the quality to play with us and play well, and I think coming back from injury now, I think he can do that, whereas Chilwell, I think that his time has come and gone. He hasn't really seen much improvement, and we were all waiting when he came back from his injury to see that he would probably ramp up and it would take a while to get to the grips of the game, but I just don't think he does that, and I don't think that he would be starting for this team if we are to try and push on and be a real institution. I don't think that Chilwell is quality enough to play for us as the starting left back. And if we are going to have to obviously choose between him and Cucurella for the bench, then I would rather have Cucurella than Chilwell. The next player I'm going to be putting in here now is obviously Levi Colwill, and he's going to go straight into the first 11. This is the reason why I put Badiashile in the bench slot, because Colwill is obviously going to be our left centre-back next season. I think he's good enough to do that. I think that he's proven when he has played here that he has more to offer than when obviously he was playing out on the left-back role for some reason. And if I had to choose between the two, I probably would choose Colwill. Obviously, he's got a lot more to give than he's actually been showing this season. I don't think he's had a very good season in terms of form, but I do think that obviously there is still a really good player in there. Maybe under a different manager, if we get a new manager, he'll show those qualities that he showed at Brighton a little bit more, or maybe if Poch does stay and we don't get a new manager, he can find a different way of using him and kind of get the best out of him that way. I think that his long distribution is one of his biggest strengths that we could utilise, and I don't think he uses it very much for Chelsea, as well as definitely not as much as we saw when he was playing for Brighton. And obviously he'll have to improve in defensive scenarios. I think that that's something that he will get better at. Obviously he is still really young, but I think he is genuinely one of those players, and not only just because he wears the 26, he is one of those players that could end up being a very good captain for us if he's to stay with us long term. Let's move on to the next player. This is going to be Romeo Lavia. Now this one's an interesting one because this all depends on what type of system the manager wants to use. I think from what we've seen, and from the faith that we've seen him put into Carney Chukwuemeka, and the faith that we've seen him put into other players when we were playing that system, I think Lavia is going to be a bench player. And this is kind of annoying because the whole LFC midfield that we kind of joked about, I think was a good pipe dream to have, but I don't think that Lavia, even when he's back from his injury, especially considering how long this injury has been, which we still don't really know what's going on with that really, he's just kind of been in limbo the entire season. I don't think that that's the midfield three that he would go for, genuinely. I think that he would probably go for two more solid defensive kind of minded midfielders, and then one that can push on and join the attack in that 5 kind of system. Obviously, maybe he does a different thing here where he plays Caicedo and Lavia together and Enzo is that player that pushes up. I don't know. It all kind of revolves around one player that I will talk about later, and whether they are here next season, and if they are, then I don't think that things change. I think that Enzo and Caicedo will still hold those two holding roles, and then there'll be another player further up the pitch. Next is Alex Matos, and now this one's another interesting one because I think that he's been very, very good out on loan this season, and he's definitely a good enough player to kind of play for us. I don't think he's going to be promoted. I probably think he's going to get another loan, maybe at a Premier League side next, and once he kind of settles into the Premier League, then the season after we can kind of look at him to see if he will perform in a Chelsea shirt. Obviously, I'm not going to sell him. Obviously, I don't think staying in the reserves would be a good thing for him. I think that going out on another loan would be a very good thing for him. He's already been doing very, very well on loan this season, and with the fans questioning why he's not in the starting 11 a lot of the time, which is nice to see. So yeah, I think that he's definitely an option there. Bashir Humphreys is next, and this one's funny because I think that he definitely is a player that could be promoted. I think he's good enough for that role, but with us having Colwill and Badiashile as our left-sided centre-back options, I don't think that he will. I don't think that he's a player that's going to be sold. I don't think he's a player that deserves to be put on the reserve, so I think he is going to be one of those players that's kind of put on loan limbo. He's been doing very well out in Germany in the last few years, I believe, so he'll probably do that again. I think that he can probably stay there and do that job. Maybe if he gets assessed again in pre-season, maybe he can have some involvement. Other than that, I think that alone is a good move for him. Next up is Wesley Fofana, and now, as I said, I'm prefacing this based on if all the players are fully fit. If he is fully fit, I still believe, and this is what I said in my last update, I still believe that he is our starting centre-back. I think he's good enough to play there. Obviously, with the long-term injuries that he's had, that could hamper him, but I don't think it will particularly. I think that if he gets back up to full speed, I still think that he's got more quality in that centre-back spot than any of our other right-sided players, which is saying something considering how much I rate Axel Disasi. I have spoken about in the past. I think Axel Disasi will be a player that we can rely on. He's very recently just made that silly mistake for the goal, but I don't think that takes away from his overall performances this season. He's been very reliable, and reliability is and availability is one of the best abilities you can have. So perhaps Fofana doesn't make it past him, and he does hold the bench. And actually, I've now kind of convinced myself that maybe I should put him on the bench. You know what? Yeah, I'm putting him on the bench. I've actually just convinced myself mid-video. Yeah, I think that Disasi will probably actually start for us, just because I don't think that Fofana is very reliable. If he was 100%, if he goes a whole season without an injury like Disasi has, I think that he would play as the first 11, but I don't think he's reliable enough to kind of do that. Actually, now thinking about it, so I'll put him on the bench. Next up is Andre Santos. Now, this one really, really irks me. I genuinely believe he is good enough to be promoted. He's one of those players like Cassidy that has come through at the same time, and I think that he's good enough to play. Obviously, he's finally now getting some starts at Strasbourg, which he was not getting starts at Nottingham Forest. He wasn't getting starts when he was here for a little bit, and obviously he went to play for Brazil for a little bit. Now he's got another loan. He's at Strasbourg. He's now starting to get into the first 11. He's been showing his quality. I think that he's one of those players that could be promoted and could really be a good player for the bench if one of these players like Carney or Lavia aren't able to play. I think that in pre-season when we were playing with him, he never looked out of place. We never looked like a worse side when he was playing. And I think he's definitely a player that deserves a chance. I don't think putting him out on another loan, considering how unsuccessful the loans were that we put him through, and maybe that's just obviously mismanagement on the director's part, but I don't think that would serve him well going out on loan again, because we saw how awful it was for him going out on loan. I think just give him the chance, genuinely. Give him a chance to impress in pre-season, and if he takes the spot, then he should be promoted. And he can obviously rotate in for cup games if he needs to, or if he doesn't, he can just take one of the roles, or just be a bench player. I think that's good for him. I think he's good enough to play for this team. Speaking of players that are good enough to play for the team, next up is Diego Moreira, and I do not have any faith in this guy to ever be good enough for us. I don't think he'll be sold because, again, we bought him so recently. He's one of those players that definitely could go out on loan again and get more experience, but I genuinely think that he probably will be a player that kind of rots in the reserves, or just stays in the youth team. He hasn't really sprung on leaps and bounds like we kind of expected him to, and I think that this is a place where he will go. Next up is Mason Burstow. Now, I think Mason Burstow is one of those players that could be sold. I don't think he has enough quality to ever really make it at Chelsea. We've kind of seen when he was playing for us in pre-season that he wasn't the greatest. Obviously, he hasn't had the greatest start to life either on his loan. And I think that he would probably either be a player that just goes out on loan again and is in that loan limbo, or is just sold to a lower league club. And I think that's genuinely what his kind of destiny is. I think he is destined to kind of be sold to a Championship or League One side, and then whether he can climb his way back up into the Premier League that way, I think that might be how he gets there, but otherwise, I don't think there's much point putting him out on loan, in truth. Leo Castledine, oh, this one's really annoying. This one's really, really annoying because I think that he is good enough to be promoted. He's obviously good enough to be promoted. I don't think he's going to be, though. I think that he's a little bit further away than some of the other players, and I think he is going to just stay in the youth team, which is upsetting because I think that he has a lot to give and definitely could be a player that... You know what? No, actually, I'm going to put him in promote because I think he's definitely a player that could be one of those guys that comes in when it's the FA Cup or whatever to make the bench. I definitely think that he's one of those players, and if he gets on the pitch, I think that he can be promoted in that way. So I think he could definitely be one of those players that can be promoted. I don't think that him staying in the youth team much longer than maybe a year or two would be beneficial for him. Maybe he goes out on loan next year. I'm not sure about that. I think he's still a bit too young for that at the moment, but definitely is a player that's capable of being given the chance if he is given the chance, and he will probably take it if he is. Next up is Thiago Silva. Now, this is one that I've kind of made abundantly clear. I think he needs to be sold. Well, not really sold. I think that he just kind of needs to be like phased out of the team. Obviously, he's got a lot of experience. Obviously, he's doing his coaching now, he's doing his coaching qualifications, and I think that's basically the reason why I've kind of put him here, is that I think that he has kind of understood now that his time is coming to an end in football. I expect him to basically go out to Brazil and become one of those player coaches, or maybe become an assistant manager for a club or something. Hell, if he wants to become an assistant manager for Chelsea, I think that's a really good spot for him, because I do believe that him and his family definitely have a place in Chelsea Football Club in some respects. If he wants to be a coach, he can be a coach, be under one of our staff, but I just don't think that he is the type of player that we need anymore. And obviously we've seen the decline that's happened this season. I don't think he's been as good as he was the season prior, and in this new revolutionary kind of young Chelsea side, I think that he doesn't have a place. Obviously we've got an abundance of centre-backs, and he's obviously been one of those players that's been an incredible servant for us and has been absolutely fantastic on his day, but we are starting to see that kind of deterioration, and obviously now he's starting to get injuries as well, and obviously you don't really want to be running men into the ground when they don't need to be playing. As I said, he's been an incredible servant, so it's a good thing that he's able to go out on his own terms and become a coach, because that seems to be what he wants to do. But with the, as I said, with the kind of age of him now and the up and coming centre backs that we have or will be bringing in, because obviously we've been linked to some of them, I don't think he has a place in this team, and he will be one of those players that just blocks the development of our other centre backs. So he can definitely be one that's either sold or released. I didn't actually put released here, but I think that he will kind of just run out his contract. Next up is Marc Cucurella. Now this is funny because this is really funny because I think we'll bring in a left back, so I think he will be a bench player. The issue is, obviously, I'm making a first 11 here, and it would be silly for me to make a first 11 without a left back, so I'm going to put him in the first 11 for now. I do think he will move to the bench if we bring in a left back, so I think that's kind of where he will be. I said Cucurella definitely has more potential in my opinion than Chilwell does, which is why I put Chilwell here. Obviously, if we do bring in another left back, which it could be either Alphonso Davies is one that we've been linked to. If we get Alphonso Davies, for example, he's just going to obviously start every single game, and Cucurella will probably be dropped to the bench. If we bring in someone who's a little bit less experienced and isn't as quality, maybe Kerkez, as I've said before, maybe he can be the starting left back until he's kind of fully up to speed. But yeah, as for this hypothetical scenario where I have to make a starting 11, it would be silly to not include a left back, so Cucurella will play. Likewise, the next player is Axel Disasi, and he is the player that I'm going to be putting in as our starting right centre-back for now. As I said, we've kind of discussed that we may be bringing in a centre-back next season, so maybe he loses his place there. If Fofana keeps fit the entire season, I think that he will take his place, but Disasi has been so reliable and basically has played almost every single minute for us this season, and I think that will continue next season. I don't think he's really been as bad as a lot of people have kind of said. I think that he gets a lot of unnecessary kind of hate, and I think he's been very solid as a centre-back. I think he gets blamed for a lot of things that aren't actually his fault, like for example this mistake that has just happened in the cup. I think a lot of people are putting the blame on him. I don't think it's solely his fault. He's obviously one of the players involved in the incident, but I don't think he's helped out by Gusto's horrific throw and Sanchez's horrific position, and then he's obviously pushed off the ball when he's passing it back, so I don't really blame him that much, but there we are. For next season, I think that he is definitely capable of playing as that starting centre-back, and maybe him and Fofana, as both French-speaking players, could actually partnership at some time as well, if Levi ever gets injured or something like that, so maybe that's an option. But I do think that he is a rock in this defence, and I think he will stay there for the foreseeable future. Next up is Jimmy Tauriainen. Now, this is an interesting one, because we did see him get a few minutes in the Cup. Do I think that he's going to be promoted? No. Do I think he's going to go out on loan? Not really. I think he's going to be one of those players that just plays for the youth team. He is still very young. I think he's 19. So I think he'll probably just play for the youth team a bit longer before he gets promoted. Maybe he's one of those players that Poch looks at in pre-season, or the new manager looks at in pre-season and decides whether he needs to play or not. If that happens, then I think that he's definitely capable of playing. Obviously, he brings a different type of midfield presence, because he is quite a big centre mid. He's 6'2", I believe. Obviously, he's a left-footed player as well, which is interesting, because we don't have many of those in the club, especially in those positions. And I think that, as I said, if it was up to me and we were trying to make like a balanced team, I think that I would definitely give him the chance in pre-season to play as a left-sided centre mid and see what happens there, because I think that maybe he could offer something for the team. But in overall perspective, I don't think he's going to actually push on and ever take the place of any of the first teamers. I don't think he will go out on loan, because I think that that's not really beneficial for him at the moment. I think he'll just stay with the youth team for now. Next up is Conor Gallagher. Now, this is one of the most controversial ones, because I think it's very obvious that he's going to be sold. Do I kind of agree with that? Yes and no. I don't think that Gallagher is technically good enough to play for Chelsea. I think that there are definitely players we can get in his position that are better than him. I do love the guy, and I do think that he has a lot to offer this team. And as I've said in the past, I think he would be a very good bench player for us because of that crazed chaos that he kind of brings. I like to call it a controlled frenzy in a way, that he kind of brings. If Poch is the manager next season, I think that he will push for him to stay. But with the price tag that he has and the potential of getting a big profit from him as he's a homegrown player, I don't think that he will be here next season. I think he will get sold in the summer for about 50 to 60 million, which is sad, because I do like Conor and I think that he has a lot to give us. I just think that it's just the unfortunate kind of circumstance of us having to raise funds. I think that he's going to be a victim of that and probably get sold. As I said, kind of upsetting, because I would like for him to continue with us, because I think he is a very good personality, and obviously he's been captaining the side a lot with James and Chilwell out injured, so he's kind of been the kind of player that people in our team has kind of looked up to. He's been that role model, that kind of leader in that way of always putting in the effort. That's the one thing I will never discredit him for, is that he always plays for the badge. And we do need a lot of players like that, but as I said, I think he's just going to be an unfortunate victim of circumstance, and he will probably be sold in the summer. Next up is Tyreek George. Now, this is an interesting one. I think that George definitely has the chance to impress if he was to be promoted. I think he's still a bit too young at the moment. I think that he'll probably continue to play for the youth team, in truth, and then maybe next season or the season after next, I think he'll probably go out on a loan or maybe even get promoted. I think that George is one of those players that definitely has a lot to offer the youth team still, and I wouldn't want to rush him into a first team spot or anything and him to kind of get hampered by that massive step up in quality. I think that he's going very well at the moment, and he should just continue to do so. Next up is Alfie Gilchrist. Now, this is an interesting one because he's already been promoted. I think that he's a very good bench player for us because he's able to play multiple positions. He can obviously play at right back, he can play at left back, as we've seen. He's a centre back by trade, and I think that is his best position. As I said, I don't think there's much to change about Gilchrist. I think he's going to just stay on the bench and play with us, and obviously he's got a very good player to kind of rotate in for cup games because he can hold his own in cup games. Maybe after a few years he'll be good enough to keep starting for us, but as for now I don't think he really is. But as I said, he's a very useful player, especially he's so young, and the faith that Poch has kind of put in him to be a bench player I kind of think shows how good he is for his age. And yeah, I think that he'll just continue to play off of the bench. Not much will change there next season. Next up is Lewis Hall. Now, this one's a sad one because we know that Lewis Hall is already going to Newcastle. That's basically been confirmed at this point. Really, really silly decision, I think, to let him go because I think he is very, very good and definitely could have been our starting left back. And I think that he's a player that, like Martson before him, could have definitely been our starting left back and just never had any faith put in him to do that job, which is really upsetting. Obviously, he's a Newcastle fan in his heart, and I think that he's very happy at Newcastle. So hopefully, I always hope the best for any player that ever puts on a Chelsea shirt, and I hope that when he moves on to Newcastle and he can play there more regularly next season, I think he will continue to do that, and yeah, I hope he has a good showing over there. Next up is Christopher and Nkunku. Now, as I said, this is based on whether they are fit. In the grand scheme of things, if Nkunku is fit, he 100% starts. 100% starts in this role, in between Mudryk and Palmer. I think that this is a very decent front four and a very dangerous front four, but considering how Palmer likes to drop deep and these players like to run in, they're all very technical, all very good at those kind of quick in-between passes, and a lot of them are very good at running in behind. I think this is a very solid front four, and if we do bring in a more experienced striker, I think this might be even better if they come in and then Jackson moves over to the left wing and Mudryk goes to the bench. I think that this is a very solid partnership, and I said, on his day, Nkunku is our most technical player. Obviously, Palmer's been the shining light of this team, but we've seen in patches how good Nkunku can be, especially in tight spaces. Unfortunately, I think he's been a bit mismanaged this season, not only just in terms of his injuries and how he's been rushed back into the team, but also just the positions he's been playing in are not really favourable for him. I think he keeps being put into, for some reason, we never see him and Jackson kind of play together. We always see if he does come on when Jackson's on the pitch, Jackson will come off, or if they do play together, he'll play as the striker and Jackson will go to left wing, which doesn't really suit either of them. I think that we kind of need to see them play together when he is in the kind of second striker or cam role. We already have a left winger on like Mudryk, and Jackson's down the centre, and I think that will be a very successful partnership in that regard. As we saw from pre-season, before Nkunku got injured, we saw that partnership was blooming, and yeah, I think that that's a very good front four for us that could definitely take us places. Next up is Leslie Ugochukwu. Now, I've said this in the past, I think Ugochukwu is a very decent player, and I think he can definitely be the rotational bench CDM. His profile is obviously very different to the other centre mids that we do have. He's obviously a very tall, kind of bolstering DM in a way, whereas the other ones are all a bit more box-to-box. Lavia is a bit more defensive than, say, Caicedo. I think Caicedo is the most box-to-box out of the defensive midfielders that we have, but Leslie's definitely got a place in this team to rotate in off of the bench and play, especially if we ever decide to tactically change things up, and if we want to play two solid central defensive midfielders, we could definitely play Lavia and Ugochukwu together, and then obviously have someone like Nkunku as the cam, or maybe Enzo as a kind of more forward-thinking centre mid. Even Caicedo could play that if we really wanted to hold deep and defend. We could definitely play all three of these together. He definitely has a place in the team, and obviously he's very young and will get better with time. Obviously he's been unfortunate with injury this season, but I think that when he has played for us, he hasn't ever been horrifically bad. I think that he's had a few shaky-ish games, but overall I think he's been quite comfortable whenever he's come into that role, and he can definitely do that next season. Next up is Malo Gusto. Now, this is going to be controversial. This is going to be really controversial. I'm going to put Malo Gusto in the first 11. And this is over the player that is going to be talked about at some point soon. Obviously, I'm saying that next season, I think that Gusto starts over James. I am basing this off of if they are fit and continue to play the way that they have been playing. I think Gusto genuinely offers more than James does at this point, because availability is the one of the biggest abilities, and if James can't stay fit for an entire season, which I don't think he'll ever will be able to, which is unfortunate, then Gusto will take his spot. He has been absolutely wonderful this season, Malo Gusto, and he has so much more to give, and he's obviously so young and he can develop to the point where I think that he genuinely rivals James now for that right back spot, and I think that it would be a disservice for me to say that he doesn't start for us if they're both fit. Obviously, the idea of him playing at left back and Reece playing at right back is something that's been discussed. Reece playing in a midfield role is something that's been discussed. Reece playing in a right centre back role has been discussed. There's been loads of things discussed of how to get them both into the same team, but I do think having them both in the ranks, having them rotate in for each other, is better and more beneficial to try and shove them both into the same team, because if one of them gets injured whilst that happens, then we kind of lose our shape. I am just going to quickly put put James in as well. This is the thing which is kind of controversial. So this, I obviously said I'm going to be putting 11 players here. I think these two are so close in terms of playing and ability at the moment that I genuinely cannot decide between them. I don't think that it would be smart for me to say that James holds the bench. If I said this and said, oh yeah, Gusto obviously plays and James holds the bench, I think that would be horrifically stupid to say. But then again, I still feel that if I was to say that Malo Gusto was the bench right back and James was the starting right back, this would annoy people too. And this would annoy me. I would be very upset to see Gusto on the bench considering the performances he's been putting in this season. Obviously, he has 8 assists this season, both in the league and in the cups, respectively, and that's coming from a player that's been very solidly defensively as well, and he's been putting on 7 to 8 out of 10 performances pretty much every single week, and I think it would be silly for us to kind of just throw him straight back onto the bench as soon as James comes back, and I think that wouldn't be fitting with the idea of playing players that deserve to play and playing players on merit, which Poch has talked about in the past. He likes to play players on merit. I don't think he's ever actually shown that, so I think that's a very silly thing for him to have said. But if that is true, I think that they both deserve to be in the starting 11, so I'm genuinely not going to decide between the two of them. You guys can debate about that down in the comments. I think that, as I said, I think it would just be unfair to Gusto, considering how well he's played this season, to just immediately throw him on the bench. If I were to choose, as I said, if I were to be doing this 100% of if they're fit, if everyone's fit, there would be rotation here. Obviously, as I said, Fofana would come in for Disasi. I think James would start here 100% if he was fit for the whole season. I don't think that's ever going to happen. Obviously, he's had his surgery now and he's going through his rehab. Maybe he can solidify that right back spot. But as for now, Gusto genuinely has him level. I think they are level in terms of how good they are, because that's one of the things that we've kind of discussed about James in the past and the reason why he's so important. Obviously now he's the captain as well, which is very important, but we always said that, oh, James has got very good creative attributes, but his main strength is the fact that he is so difficult to get past for every winger, and that he kind of locks everyone up. The thing which we kind of feared is that getting rid of him and having someone else in that role, that would change. It has not changed at all. Gusto has obviously got the Malo Gusto penitentiary that I like to talk about, and he has locked up so many wingers and has also provided 8 assists, as I said. So he's been doing that role so good, and genuinely, with the French connection as well, we have a lot of French speaking players. I think that he has a place here. Whether or not he keeps this place is obviously, as I said, up to debate, but I think that his link up with Palmer as well on the right hand side has been something that's been really nice to see, and those two have kind of grown towards each other and know how to play with each other, whereas I don't think that Palmer and James really do have that at the moment, because they've rarely played together, because James has been out for so long. So yeah, just my personal opinion, I think they're both good enough to start. If I was putting this into an actual first 11 based on fitness, Gusto would drop to the bench. If I was putting this in the first 11 based on what's going on right now, James would drop to the bench. But I think like it's unjust to drop either one of these from the first 11, because I think they're both good enough to start. The final player in the video is going to be Angelo Gabriel. Now, this is one of those players that I think could genuinely think he could be promoted to the first team. I think he's good enough to do that. Will he be promoted for the first team? Probably not. I think he's good enough for it though. And as I said, we've got so many right-footed or left-footed right wingers now, with obviously Palmer, Madueke, we've got Gabriel. I think all of them could definitely play here, and I think having that abundance of choice is a good thing. I think he can obviously rotate in when we need him for like cup games and stuff, and if we want to play Palmer in the centre and we need to bring in someone else and we need someone on the bench, he could definitely play that way, or Madueke could be on the bench and he could play in that right wing spot. It depends on circumstances, but as I said, this is just my updated tier list, and you guys were asking for an updated tier list, so this is my updated tier list for next season. As I said, this could obviously change depending on players that we bring in and fitness and what have you, but as for now, this is kind of what I would like to see. Yeah, just for completion's sake, because I do want 11 players in here, I am going to drop Gusto to the bench, because I do think, I do believe in my heart of hearts, if we are to get a fully fit squad, I think that James would start, just because I think that Mauricio Pochettino, if he's the coach, prefers James for some reason. I'm not really sure why. This is basically the what I would do, but it's so close for Gusto being in here, like so close. I genuinely think that he's good enough to start. And that is my list. So, as I said, if you've got any disagreements with this, leave them in the comments and I'll be sure to look at them. I always look at every comment I ever get, and the ones which I like I'll pin and give them hearts, and the ones that I disagree with we'll have a nice debate down in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching as ever, and remember, in the rain or in the dry, keep that blue flag flying high. Come on, you Blues.